Are you tired by the arrogance and the ignorance and the prejudicial attitude of your particular brand of faith or religion? Are you ready for a change? You're ready for something more expansive, more progressive, more enlightened? Stay tuned. Well, welcome to Streaming Consciousness. I'm Carlton Pearson, and every time I get a chance to lecture or teach or admonish, my objective is to stretch the thinking of the person who's listening. Tonight, that would be you. I always ask the question, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And how do those beliefs add to or subtract from the quality of your life? Because life starts and stops, if you will, with how you believe or what you believe about yourself, as well as what you believe in general. Both of those faith systems affect or infect or sometimes can defect your life. Tonight, I want to talk about and I'm from those of you who know me, I'm from a fairly strict fundamentalist background in classical fundamentalist Pentecostalism. Pentecostalism is on the extreme edge of fundamentalist Christianity, Protestant fundamentalist Christianity. Heavy emphasis on heaven and hell, demons, devils, an angry God, strict legalistic approaches to religion, appeasing an angry God, pleasing a difficult one, and a long code of ethics and moral standards and disciplines and dogmas and doctrines and rituals and rites and liturgy, and it's based on constantly not knowing what this angry God might do or how you might instantly tick him or it off. And then that God gets angry and starts throwing fiery darts in tornadoes or tsunamis or volcanoes or hurricanes or AIDS or cancer or some dread disease. And out of the 7 billion people, 3/3 of them, if you consider Islam and Christianity alone, based out of Judaism, the Abrahamic faiths, about half the population of the planet, including various aspects of Hinduism and not much Buddhism, but there's this constant fear of this angry entity that's invisible and ubiquitous, omnipresent, omnipotent, or omnipotent, and all-knowing, omniscient, all-knowing science. So when you raise in that tradition, as I have been and billions have, what I'm going to say tonight, or what I talk about in this, what I call expanded consciousness approach to faith or spirituality, I'm talking about a good portion of the planet and the collective consciousness of those people have produced an earth that seems unsafe in nearly every way. The things we think about God and the type of dastardly deeds we've done to other human beings in the name of that God is a concern. Nearly every war that's ever been fought in the history of humankind can be traced either directly or indirectly to someone's faith tradition. They presume that the people they are warring against are infidels, unbelievers, or don't believe correctly about their image of God. Even the Christian Judeo-Bible, Old and New Testament, is a Jewish book written by Jews to Jews primarily about a Jewish understanding of divinity. And Christianity is sort of a rogue Jewish religion, cult following Jesus, who was a Jew, and presuming that Jews killed Jesus. Really, the Romans or the Latins killed him. might have been instigated by the Sanhedrin court, which was the strict religious, legalistic body, ruling body of the Jewish culture. I've had 62 years to think about all of this. 45 of those years ordained to preach this fear-based theology, which I did with the rest and best of them. And now in the second half of my life, which is the last half of my life on this plane, I'm having to reassess all that. So some of the things I make, I know they're troubling to a little people or bothersome, but they're troubling and bothersome to me that I need to say them, or that I am impressed to say them, because I just returned from a conference in Los Angeles by my friend, headed up and hosted by my friend Michael Beckwith, and the theme of the conference was listen and unlearn. Not listen and learn, listen and unlearn. And I've been listening for the last 20 years, but only hearing, or I've been hearing for the last 20 years, and only listening the last 10 or 12, and I may be unlearning more than I'm learning. I'm having to reassess a lot of what I believe. Just recently, Bruce Jenner, who came out as Caitlyn, was exposed to the world, having gone through his transgendered experience of wearing. He did not have a sexual gender reassignment, but he did decide that he was no longer a man. It wasn't going to look like or act like a man, but it was going to be a woman and dress like a woman. He was seen by the world as a very attractive, elegant, feminine-looking woman, at least from the pictures. I'm sure they were shopped somewhat, but he looked beautiful. Had somebody not told the world or me that it was a man, I wouldn't have believed it was a man. I wouldn't have believed it was Bruce Jenner, whose name is Caitlyn. Anyway, the internet lit up. I mean, people were going nuts. Most of it, surprisingly, I might say, was positive and very supportive. Hollywood, you never heard one negative word from Hollywood. And his own children, his sons and his daughters and his grandchildren were speaking favorably, respectfully, and they kept saying things like, you know, I admire your courage. It took a lot of courage to do this. This was tough. And it was pretty profound that it should come out that way. At the same time, the news is about the Duggars, who has a reality show called 19 and Counting. And they're a very religious Christian fundamentalist family that lives in Arkansas. And they're touting their Christian values, and I think doing it in an effective way based on the traditional way of thinking fundamentalist Christianity. And many, many millions of Christians are very happy with their approach, because they're really, you know, guarding the faith and fighting for the faith and standing for the truth and all the things that we believe are important for Christians to do. And then recently, their oldest son, it's been disclosed that he had sex with minors when he was 15 years old, including 3 of his own sisters. He didn't really have sex with them, but he touched them inappropriately. How that ever got out, and I realize we've made a lot of it. I don't think anybody would have made much of it had they not been the kind of people that called themselves representing fundamentalist postures and positions. And they, Mrs. Duggar was on the phone for political reasons denouncing marriage equality, talking about it being a sin, and it disrupted family values and the image of marriage between a man and a woman, and they were using the name of God and the scriptures in the Bible to base their position with. Now she's saying God has forgiven her son. We have forgiven him, and I think you all should forgive him for acting inappropriately sexually toward underage girls, including his own sisters. Whoopi saw that, you know, and she made this. She just jumped on it this morning on The View. And she really did not denounce her for bringing up Christianity, but for using God to forgive her son, and yet damning other people to hell for their lifestyles. Now, the image of Christianity as we've known it is tarnished probably irreparably. I don't think we'll ever be able to repair the image of fallen preachers, you know, hypocrisy, judgmentalism, bigotry, homophobia, arrogance, ignorance, slander, duplicitous moves within religious church. And they're literally, not just Christianity, but all religions. Fundamentalists in any religion tend to be a threat. Unfortunately, religious judgmentalism is the exact opposite of how Christians are supposed to live their life. We're supposed to, and I've been one for most of my life. I'm 4 generations. So I have a lot of that still in me, even though I've deviated, some would say, and expanded my consciousness or the reach of my thought about Christ and Jesus and the consciousness of Christ, the person and or purpose of Christ. When you speak of Christ consciousness, you're not just talking about Jesus. You might be talking about Krishna or Buddha or Dionysius or Pythagoras or Osiris, or Isis from Egyptian mythology. There's always been these godmen, and I've made several references on these lectures to this. There's always been these godmen that are out there, and they represent some divine principle in the earth, divine mind. They were all supposedly born December 25th to virgin mothers. History is not exact on all of this, but that's what they can summarize or surmise was the case. We don't know all the details of these particular God-type men or messianic personalities who have come through history, including Zoroaster. Excuse me. And all of them had power, almost like Hitler, who claimed to be a Christian, but had a certain energy about him that all of Eastern Europe followed him. There was a certain charisma, a certain anointing, you would say, that you could hear it in his voice. And when he came forth, he was mesmerizing the people and magnetizing them with his words. And the terrible things he did with that power, history has recorded. And yet he named Christ as his Lord, or Jesus as his Lord, and I made reference to that not long ago as well. I called one of my lectures spiritually transmitted diseases, religious STDs. And that is a concern of mine because I see it proliferating. At the same time, I notice that there is a shift, and I want to encourage that by acknowledging it. Had a conversation with Rob Bell, who wrote the book Love Wins, and was a novel and notorious fundamentalist preacher here in America, pastored the Mars Hill Church in Michigan. And when I did Nightline with Deepak Chopra, one of his colleagues and comrades, Mark Driscoll, but he pastors a Mars Hill type church in Seattle, and we actually shot the Nightline show in his church. Staunchly fundamentalist, very chauvinistic, almost violent toward women. A good guy, don't get me wrong when I say he was a typical fundamentalist Christian, and I complimented him on his work and also warned him that very night of his arrogance and that he should be careful about his life. He has since stepped down from the ministry for some of the reasons I warned him could be a possibility. He just was too gung-ho, too arrogant. He put a bad image out there. Rob stepped down after writing this book, Love Wins. He no longer believes in a literal hell. He doesn't believe in a lot of the fundamentalist positions and postures of the Christian church. He's actually coming to Tulsa. If you're listening to this live, he'll be here next month because I'm taping this in June. I'm going to be there and take as many people with me as I can. It'll be very telling to find out how many people here in mid-America, particularly in the buckle of the Bible Belt, Tulsa, Oklahoma, will go to the Brady Theater, which seats at least 1,000 people or more, and hear him talk. And he's brilliant. And his theme is everything is spiritual. And, the scripture says, well, we look not at the things that are seen, but the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal or temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So we have to look for the things you cannot see in the natural, that are not obvious. Look at things that are less obvious. We walk by faith and not by the obvious, because sometimes the obvious can be a huge distraction. Anyway, I'm thinking about all these different ways of thinking and the judgmentalism and unfortunately, religious judgmentalism is the exact opposite of how we are called as Christians to love. Now, some people don't even call me a Christian anymore, and I don't mind somebody saying I'm not a Christian, but I try to be Christ-like based on my understanding of the Christ principle and the many Christ persons that have lived on the planet. They were all good teachers, and many of them were executed. They had disciples, and they're all expected to be resurrected. History can document at least 10 of them. And they all have similar attributes mythologically and historically to their lives and ministries. In Christianity, we often have an addiction to the sin of religious judgmentalism. We are addicted to it. So, but when we're honest with ourselves, and we look at the way we judge people, we don't do a very good job of it because we don't know the facts. I never judge a person based on what they did, but by what they were thinking 10 minutes before they did it, or 10 days, or 10 weeks, or 10 months, or even 10 years before they did it. Things build up. Things we call sin. Somebody falls into adultery or fornication. They get drunk or they abuse drugs once or twice in their life and they get caught, or they fall prey to their own weakness sexually, to their passions for sex. And human beings are spiritual, sensual, sexual, and social. We're all four. And weaving the balance between your spirituality, your sociology, your sexuality, and your sensual. When I say senses, the things you can touch, taste, hear, and feel sensually. Whether you're looking at a house or a car or somebody's physical attributes, it's sensual. It can lead to sexual. It can also be. You can also be attracted by your spiritual inclinations towards another human being or your social desire to be connected. Those things they're unavoidable, and we as humans have not learned how to walk that out and work that out with decency or dignity, especially when we are suppressed by religious presuppositions. So I address these issues to see if we can get beyond this, and I think, of course, we can. Very concerned. I subscribe to this Patheos, which is a progressive Christian channel, and they make comments about a number of interesting things that are happening in the world secularly and how they influence supposedly the Christian approach. But recently I read an article that said the numbers are out, and this is very important for you to recognize. The Pew Forum tells us that the number of people in the United States who identify as Christian is down again. And the number of people who identify as mainline Protestants is down. Between 4,000 and 7,000 churches close in this country every year. 1,200 to 1,500 pastors leave the ministry every month. 1,200 to 1,500 Christians or church members leave church every day. The numbers are in. The ship is sinking, folks. Somebody said, we are bailing out water like with tiny communion cups. But the ship is going down. The shift is taking place. And it isn't because technology has drawn us out of community or because millennials, and that's the age between 17, I think, or 19 and 35, who don't believe in the Bible, don't believe in God, they're agnostic or atheists, they're not into any of the traditional religious virtues or values that have been embraced by Christianity. And it's not because Walmart is open 24 hours and people are finding other things to do. It's just that we, the church, or America, is becoming increasingly faithless, I should say. There's just not the traditional religious motivations. The culture at large is evolving, and the church refuses to. So the faith of our fathers is diminishing to another kind of belief system, where people are accepting a pluralistic culture. They're attracted to the diversity. They're marrying outside their religion. They're marrying or they're living with somebody outside of marriage. They're having babies outside of the covenant. They're intermarrying different religions, different ethnicities, even female marrying a female and male marrying a male. All it's sort of like anything goes, but the culture itself is leaning into it and accepting it as the norm. So these are new modalities, new paradigms. For years I've preached about the new wine, and Jesus makes a reference to new wine and old wineskins, and how new wine is too potent for old wineskins, and the fermentation and the strength of it causes the old wineskins to burst. That's kind of what happened to me here in Tulsa about 10 or 12 years ago. And I started preaching this new wine that I believe was coming to me of my own spiritual origins. My transcendent consciousness was moving me into a broader realm of thinking. My church spilled on me. People literally left by the thousands. It's like the old wineskin burst. I spent, some time trying to repair the old wineskins. In fact, that's what my ministry was, apostolic, as I traveled across the country and the world. I was always repairing old wineskins, and now my inclination is not to repair old wineskins, but to replace them with new wineskins, new modalities, new models, new modems, new forms and formulas, a reformation. That's what's happening right now all over the world. It's happening in my own soul, it's happening in my own spirit, it's happening in my family, it's happening in the culture. I'm aware. Who would have ever thought that a male Olympic winner, and decathlon is a hard, there's 10 different things you do to win that award. I mean, you work physically. He worked himself up. He was muscular. He was handsome. He was very masculine. And now he's changed his name. He may eventually have gender reassignment and actually become a female, have his genitalia changed to be a woman. Everybody's confused about that, and yet who would have ever thought that at least the media culture would be so warmly embracing and saluting and celebrating him, almost as if he won another Olympic award or medal for courage, for owning his truth. And at 65 years old, it's like, man, why didn't you do this when you were 35? You got 3 wives, grandchildren, and maybe greats, I don't know. I mean, the Kardashians, now they're known, the girls are known for having sex, creating videos of sex. Now, I haven't seen them, but if somebody asked me to, I'd be a witness. But no one's asked me to look at it, but it's like, that's how they became famous. And we made them heroes or heroines. The Kardashian girls have beautiful bodies and booties and stuff. And the whole world, and they became famous not because they created great movies or they're writers or wrote or performed music or songs, or they're known for their sexuality. Then their dad, who's married to their wife, I don't know, 25 years, their mother, 25 years, changes in front of the whole world. And the culture itself, as far as we can see, at least what's portrayed through the media and in Hollywood, there's this wonderful salutation and celebration. I'm actually more impressed than I am stunned with that. But I've expanded my consciousness, have been a lot open for the last several years, but this kind of surprises me that there's been this general acceptance. If you go on the blogs, the most denunciations you're going to read are from Christian fundamentalists who's denouncing Caitlin Bruce to hell and denouncing anybody else who speaks supportively of his choice. It wasn't your choice or mine, it was his choice to own his own reality of cross-dressing. Now, we don't know, he's between a rock and a hard place, because if he, as a woman, dates men or marries a man, they're going to say he was gay in the first place. If he says he still likes women, so if he starts dating a woman, he's gay again. He's lesbian. So he ain't gonna win this as far as labels go. But it will be interesting to see who he's attracted to if he ever, doubles up. He may have a boyfriend or girlfriend, I don't know. But it'll be interesting to see that we've gone this far with him, how the culture and his children will go with him the next step. I think that there's no looking back now. I think gay marriage or marriage equality, same-gender love, is never going to go away. It's going to become massive in all cultures. I believe that men and women being together outside of the covenant of marriage will proliferate. There are less divorces. The divorce rate is down because marriage rate is down. It's not that men and women are not committed to each other for however many years, but they're living together and not in the bonds of legal marriage. I can preach marriage and I can bless you with my Bible. I'm ordained. I can marry and bury. But talk about separation of church and state. You're not legally married until a judge says you are. Till a judge signs a marriage license. I sign them. I do premarital counseling and postmarital counseling. I bless couples. I've only done one same-sex marriage. But I would have done more had people ask me if they're in love, because I'm blessing not only the marriage, I'm blessing the covenant of love and the virtue and value of that when people make those commitments. But it's interesting that what if we had to celebrate divorce like we celebrate marriage? What if you had to send out invitations, or if you were expected to send out invitations and come to a big divorce party like we go to a wedding? How different would that be? What if we had to celebrate being heterosexual, walking up to our parents saying, I need to tell you something that we've not discussed before, but Daddy, you need to know I'm heterosexual and I like women. Wouldn't it be weird if the parents said, oh my God, are you kidding me? What? Oh, Jesus. Lord have mercy. He wants to get married. He wants to have sex. Oh, Lord, that's... just switch the tables a little bit and see how you would respond. and why you'd have those responses. If you see somebody smoking a cigarette, it's very unpopular to smoke anymore. Generally, more people are resistant to cigarette smoking than they are to couples being together outside of marriage. They're more adverse to somebody smoking publicly than they are to a same-sex couple sitting there talking to one another, walking down the street holding hands. It's not illegal. They don't kick you off an airplane for that anymore. There was a time when they could do that in this country. But you can be kicked off the airplane for smoking. You can be cited for smoking in a public place. That's how dramatically our culture has shifted. Now, what should we do? Do we ignore that? No. What about embracing it? What about saying, okay, I'm not going to fight it. Instead of cursing the so-called darkness, just light a candle. Be kinder, be gentler. Get out of people's business. That's why the church is losing so much. In Christianity, we often have this addiction, as I say, to judgmentalism. We fight. Our complete inability to judge someone properly stems from the fact that we never have all the information. We don't know what's really going on in anybody's mind. We know people will commit quote-unquote sin. They hate and kill and steal and rob and lie. We all know the Ten Commandments. Even non-Jews and non-Christians know some of the Ten Commandments. Most people, even preachers, can't tell you where they are in the Bible. Actually quoted this chapter and verse of a book. Most Christians cannot name all 10 of them, and they can't name them in order. It's just like most senators who swear on the Bible have never read it and never will read it. They also swear that they will defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Most of them have never read it, or if they did, it was years ago in college when they had to take an exam. They don't remember most of the amendments. Strangely enough, many people don't even know the Pledge of Allegiance anymore in America, and yet they're Americans. Now, I'm not criticizing, I'm observing the fact that there's a change taking place in the world. And we're all a part of that change. And the best thing to do with a so-called enemy is make them a friend. Instead of fighting, because what you fight, you ignite. What you fight, you invite. What you fight, you incite. What's wrong with going with the flow and finding your space and place and pace in the culture and embracing the universe, making it your friend, loving everything and everybody and seeing that it all has some purpose. Otherwise, you could sit around brooding about all the deadly negative things that are happening on the planet, make your list of things you hate, and then lose sleep over it, or can't sleep, or you're having nervous anxiety and frustration and bitterness, and you're developing ulcers and cysts and tumors and growths and frustration. Do you know that the number one drug that's sold or bought by people between age 18 and 50 are antidepressants? More people are taking antidepressants than any drug in the pharmaceutical world. Between 18 and 50, 81% is anti. Where's all this depression coming from? Depression is an inner experience. Depression is an inner expression. Depression is an inner exposure. Why the depression? Why the anxiety? Why the sadness? Why the madness? Why the anger? It stems from a person feeling inadequate about their lives. They don't feel the value or virtue of their souls. The culture or the religion or their faith has made them think that God doesn't like them, nor do the people of God or the things of God come to them, so they feel despondent. They feel hopeless. And in nearly every case, we had a full-time counseling center at our church here. My director of the counseling center and his wife, they had master's degrees in counseling. We required that. And 80 to 90% of the issues, and of course it was a Christian church and Christian counseling, but 80% of the issues that the people dealt with psychologically or psychiatrically were based on bad theology, theologos, God logic. If the God logic is sick, if the God logic or your appraisal of an angry God who cannot really be appeased, or that you're unsuccessful at appeasing them, scriptures like, if your man, and Jesus says that if you look on a woman to lust. Now, he was saying that not to the normal followers. He was saying that to Pharisees, which the word both in Hebrew and Greek means separatist, the strongest legal assembly, ruling group within the Jewish culture. The Pharisees were denouncing other so-called sinners within the Jewish culture. Remember, they accused the woman, they caught the woman in the act of adultery. Why were they so interested? How would they know? Who caught her? And then Jesus said, "You without sin cast the first stone." And supposedly they all turned and quietly walked away, beginning with the eldest Pharisees, the older ones who had more sins, who had more. And then that's when Jesus said, "Except your righteousness exceed that of the Pharisees," because the Pharisees were all in books, all clinical, all legal. It had nothing to do with their soul. Your righteousness has to be a soulish thing. Your spirit of clarity and accuracy and love. That's what righteousness, how it really manifests. Not in a book of rules about so-called sins. You without sin cast the first stone. They all walked away. He stops and begins to doodle in the sand. Nobody knows what he wrote. We think it was the email addresses of all their girlfriends, the text numbers, the phone numbers. It's interesting that religion can be so crippling and so binding, and the religionists seem to be the most avid and the most vociferous and adamant about something. The Duggars, who were calling around denouncing it, now we find out that, as the scripture talks about sin in the camp, they sin in their own camp. Now, I'm not judging them, but the world sees that they came across as pious, self-righteous, saying prayers for every meal, having devotions, reading scripture, talking Christian values. Nothing wrong with all of that. But if in your camp there are violations that you easily and so easily excuse or forgive while denouncing other people's so-called frailties and weaknesses, that's hypocrisy. Interestingly enough, I found out that the secular world can handle our truth within the so-called Christian world. They can handle the fact that the minister of music may be gay, or the preacher may have had an affair, or that the so-called righteousness among the people is not as right. The secular world has no problem with that. They don't have a problem with our truth. They have a problem with our deception, with our lies, with our hypocrisy. The church world has problems with their truth. They don't mind you hypocriting and keeping it quiet, being on the down low, or don't ask, don't tell. Doesn't necessarily mean no ask, no tell. Now, what you're going to do with that? How you doing? And how your mama and them doing? I've been in the ministry 45 years. I know what's happening in these churches, all the way across the board, particularly the strongest fundamentalist Pentecostal churches. I've seen a lot. From pastors and preachers and evangelists and apostles and prophets. You give them any biblical bishops, give them any title you want. Now, is that a denunciation? No, it's an observation. It's not even a criticism. It is, I'm observing that so much is, quote unquote, sin is happening within the church. All the references to sin in the Bible are references to Christians or Jews, not the secular world. I mean, there was evidently so much sin within those camps that preached against it, that they had to write about it in the Bible. Anything from bestiality to same-sex attractions in the Old Testament. Evidently, 4,000 years ago, when that was supposed to have been written, there was a proliferation of it. There was a propensity toward these quote-unquote sins. Way back then. Have they decreased or diminished at all? No. They've multiplied over the years. There's a reason the universe allows that to happen. Check it out. If you think natural disasters are terrible sins against the culture, they keep happening. And as far as we know it, they don't come from the Vatican or from Jerusalem or from Memphis, my former church headquarters. Natural disasters and tsunamis and stuff, where do they come from? How do we stop that? Is that because of the natural air and wind and the firmament is angry or sinful or kills innocent people? You can slam adulterers and fornications, and I'm not saying you shouldn't if that's what you like to do, but you need to also slam a storm or be angry at the God who you think sent this act of nature and killed all these innocent people. Or do you sit around and say, well, God killed them because they were Hindus or Muslims or Jews or atheists or agnostics or gays or Catholics? All the bad diseases come from Africa because that's the cursed race. That's where AIDS originated. That's where the hurricanes, they off the west coast of Africa, and they come over here. There's people, millions, that actually think that Africa is the dark continent full of evil and sin. And they've assessed that to be. So when they see a person of color walking down the street, anywhere in the world, particularly here in America, they get scared. They think there's some kind of judgment on them. These are prejudgments or prejudices that have affected the culture and the climate of our day. So I only say this to you that we might rethink what we believe, why we believe it again, and how those beliefs add to or subtract from the quality of our lives. And let's give it another chance. Or as Reverend Jackson used to say, or still says, keep hope alive. There is hope. We can change the culture. I'm saying to religious folks, and those of you who are coming out of religion, don't go back into the asylum. Stay free. Read, study. Read expanded consciousness books, and read things like Conversations with God, or Eckhart Tolle's work, or Wayne Dyer, or Deepak Chopra, Neil Donald Walsh. Yes, I'm running with these people now, and I read their work, which I was denounced to have done before, but I see them as very powerful, very revelatory, very enlightened, and less religious. And there's more peace. As I say all the time, peace is possible. Give it a try. Goodbye. See you again.